Our next speaker, Laura Trombley, is an absolute academic trailblazer. And since she's extremely knowledgeable and very brilliant and bright, I'm pretty sure she knows what she's talking about. So please welcome Laura.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. I woke up this morning and I realized that the real title of my talk ought to be Breaking Bad in Bavaria. The best experience that I ever had that helped prepare me to become a college president was not going to the Harvard Seminar for New Presidents, and it was not going to the Cornell Administrative Program. It was actually breaking my ankle. Now, breaking your ankle isn't particularly always an illuminating experience. However, I'm somewhat of a connoisseur of broken ankles. You see, I've broken one in the United States, and I've broken one in Bavaria. Now, the U.S. broken ankle isn't particularly interesting other than the fact that I managed to run over myself with my Chevy S10 truck and had to endure an argument between my automobile insurer and my medical insurer over who had to pay for it. The question was this a car accident that resulted in the broken ankle, or was this broken ankle caused by just happening to be near a car? So the American broken ankle was an annoyance. The Bavarian ankle was an education. My winding up in Eichstätt, West Germany, as it was called at the time, population 13,000, came entirely by chance. I was actually at my professor's home. I was a grad student at USC, and we were there for our Great Depression literature course. I know, sounds peppy. And I noticed that he had the same cheap reproduction of a stained glass window from the Chartres Cathedral that I had purchased when I was abroad. And I pointed it out, and he said, well, would you like to go and teach in Germany? And I said, sure. And an astonishingly short time later, I found myself on a plane with a couple of suitcases, and after many, many miles, many hours, I stepped off of the train onto a cement platform in the middle of the night in my new home. The institution where I would be teaching was the only private university in Germany, the Katholische Universität Eichstätt. Now, I had an inkling that this was a different playing field from what I was used to when I received a telegram from the university prior to my departure, politely inquiring what my religion was. Now, it felt kind of like a loaded question, and although I am agnostic, I was baptized Lutheran, and I thought perhaps that would be the best way to respond. I found out after the fact that this actually put the university in somewhat of a tight place. They had never had an American woman Protestant teaching there before. And so the Americanistic department had to forward my nomination through the rather dense labyrinth of Bavarian administration, and it eventually wound up with the president, who felt he needed to consult with the town bishop, who finally gave his permission. So he kind of bravely went where no bishop had ever gone before. My first week consisted of being processed by the university and the city. The more unusual aspects of my settling in as a wissenschaftliche Mitarbeiterin was the fact that I had to be both TB and AIDS tested. I had to write a Lebenslauf, which roughly translated means resume. However, in Bavaria, it was much more a story about my ancestry, and that actually had to be registered at the city hall. And I had to promise the city clerk that whenever I moved, I would immediately come and inform them as to my whereabouts. Apparently, this was crucial for Bavarian security. After I started teaching my American literature seminar, my students appeared to be unusually interested in me, and I kept wondering why. I assumed it had to be because I was an American, but no. They later told me that I was the first Protestant that they had ever met. Back to the 1980s. Let's just take a moment to envision my new home, keeping in mind the fact that I had moved there from Venice Beach, California. So this was arguably Venice, one of the most liberal and hedonistic places in America, and I moved to the most conservative place in Germany. Now, much of the time that I lived in Bavaria, I kind of felt as though I was trapped in a National Geographic documentary because I really didn't have much connection to the place and I didn't understand the customs or the culture. My cultural anxiety was profound. With great ceremony at the end of my first week, I was shown my new office by the housemaster. And the building where my office was located was actually a 17th century former bishop's residence, and the walls were about 12 inches thick. There was a huge wooden door that carriages used to drive through, and my office was set at some distance away from the other faculty offices. In fact, the housemaster very proudly informed me it was over the president's car garage. Great. Okay. And the only way that you could access my office was actually walking through a classroom. So when we went into my office, there was a gigantic oven, kind of like the type you would see in the early episodes of Downton Abbey. It's this huge thing, and the housemaster then showed me how to light it and how the damper worked. For all I knew, he was demonstrating cold fusion. I couldn't understand a single word that he said. I just nodded and smiled. And let me put it this way, I didn't use my office a whole lot. I didn't particularly care to walk through a class as it was in session, and since I never could figure out how to make the oven work, I couldn't go there because it was winter and it was too cold. So eventually, I would only use it to make phone calls. So on the Friday of my first week, I went in at 4:30, and I prepared to make a phone call. I was very nervous trying to communicate over the phone, and in those days, you had to go through the university operator. And so I dialed the number, and Herr Strauss answered the phone, and he always would sing out, "Ach, Frau Skandera," and I'd say, "Yes, here I am," and I would very carefully read my little sentence, and I would say a number, and then he'd say it back to me, and then I'd say the next number, and after about 5 minutes, we would finally get it all figured out. He would place the call, and I had a nice chat with my mother. Things were going reasonably well. When I hung up the phone, the housemaster very quickly zipped in, said something to me, and since I couldn't understand what he was saying, I just nodded and said, "Yes, yes, yes," and he left. I did a little work, I wrote in my journal, and all of a sudden I realized that there was a stillness in the air. Things had become very, very quiet. So I decided to leave my office. I started to walk through the building, and there was no one there. In fact, the lights had been turned off. And I thought, oh, no worries. So I went to the giant wooden door, and it was locked. And all of a sudden, it hit me. The housemaster was telling me that he was leaving and locking up and asking me if I had a key. And I was saying, yeah, 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 danke, danke. So I started to piece together my situation here. It was Friday. No one would be back until Monday. I had no food. There was no heat. Herr Strauss had gone home. I had no one to call. There was no Eichstätt 911. And I could just randomly dial numbers until maybe I reached someone in West Germany, but there was no way that I could actually explain, "Hi, I'm locked inside a 17th century former bishop's residence. I don't have a key, and can you come please help me?" I didn't even know the address of the former bishop's residence. I began to panic, I'll admit, and what I really didn't want was to become even odder than I already appeared to people in Eichstätt. I was already the tallest woman in town. I didn't need to, be known as the woman who locked herself into a building all weekend long. So in a moment of desperation, I realized the only thing I could do was just bust out. And so I opened the second floor window and hung full length. Spoiler alert, this isn't actually where I broke my ankle, and dropped and then scurried away into the darkness. Now, yes, funny now. I started to settle into my new home, And things started to work out pretty well. I had made some friends. I was taking an Ausländer, Sprache for Ausländer course. This was a language for foreigners class. And I met a wonderful international community there. One of my best friends, Ben from Kenya, was there, Genevieve from France. We had wonderful, jolly Yugoslavian seminarians, chain-smoking Italians. We would all come together in our class, and afterwards we would drink coffee and eat cake, and we would talk about our mutual experiences. Things were going fairly well until Fasching. And Fasching is Germany's version of Mardi Gras. And it's actually kind of like Mardi Gras on steroids. And I had never seen anything like it before. And it's a time when actually, particularly the last week, everything goes upside down. So everyone behaves differently. And there's a kind of anarchic air. And this was particularly strong in this little Bavarian town. So just when I started to kind of figure things out, everything changes. So I went to my one and only Fasching's ball. I came dressed as an American tourist. I thought that was appropriate. And I remember dancing to a Bruce Springsteen song, and I was fascinated by all the seminarians because they were all cross-dressed as Tina Turner. And I have to say, they looked fabulous. So I was dancing away and having fun, and my most pious student, full of the excellent Eichstätt Hofmühle beer and a kind of joie de vivre that came with Fasching, came up behind me, grabbed me by the waist, and threw me up into the air. I came down. There went the ankle. And I was hoping it was just sprained, but it wasn't. And I wound up going to the local hospital where an impish doctor wearing clogs and with a big smile said, "You have broken your jumping bone." And I had to agree with him there. And then a very large nurse came and actually put my foot in the middle of her stomach, grabbed my knee and leaned forward until my ankle was set. At that point, I have to say, I became pretty hysterical. With true German thoroughness, they put on a cast that actually went above my knee and was very, very heavy. So this meant when I walked through town, I had to do this. And when my leg got tired, I would just drag it, so much for kind of staying under the radar. All right. Now, what did I take away from all of these experiences? The biggest moment was when I returned to my apartment after breaking my ankle and having this giant cast put on. My landlady looked at me and said, "You're going home." And at that moment, I said to myself, I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. I have my friends, I have my students. Bavaria's not beating me. And so I stayed for another 3 years. And one of the things that I learned that was most important was how to strategize in an environment that was unused to foreigners and at times distinctly unfriendly. And I learned enormous lessons from that experience that I have taken with me as president of Pitzer College. It is my goal to make my campus as friendly and welcoming and supportive to everyone. At the same time, it's my goal to send as many of my students as I possibly can to countries where they will not be comfortable, where they will not know the language, where they will live with families, where they will have to eat new and unusual kinds of foods, because I want them to experience what it's like to have to fit into a place where they are not part of the dominant majority. And so, as a result, during the time that I've been at Pitzer, which is just a little over a decade now, we've seen a huge increase in the number of our students who study abroad. Just about 80% of our students go abroad, compared to under 4% nationally. And we're the Fulbright leader in the United States. Last year, 24 of our Pitzer people were awarded Fulbrights. So, to end, I hope that, well, one thing that I know, God didn't break my ankle that night. It was actually a drunken seminarian. And I don't feel at all punished by that experience. I actually feel empowered by it because it forced me to get outside of my comfort zone. And that's the wish that I have for all of you. I hope you all have the experience of going somewhere, feeling uncomfortable, having to figure things out, and ultimately making it work for you. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. Servus.